Most people believe wars are won in the trenches, but there's a fact that turns that logic on its head. An army stripped of fuel, shells, and reinforcements loses before a single soldier pulls a trigger. That's exactly what Ukraine set out to prove with one early morning strike, and what happened next didn't fit any standard military playbook. At 4:20 local time, 44 Ukrainian UJ-26 Beaver strike drones lifted off simultaneously from a classified position. Their target? A railway bridge in Luhansk, deep in occupied territory. Not just a piece of infrastructure, this was a critical artery through which Russia moved fuel, weapons, and ammunition between the occupied regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, feeding the entire Eastern Front. Ukraine had spent 2 months planning this operation under near total secrecy. Flight paths were calculated so the drones would hug the terrain and slip through radar gaps that intelligence had identified in advance. But there was one thing the command didn't know. Following previous strikes on supply routes toward Crimea, Russia had quietly reinforced key logistics nodes with Pantsir and Tor systems. The first serious obstacle the swarm encountered wasn't a missile complex, it was the Nebo-M long-range multi-band early warning radar. This radar is capable of detecting targets at long distances, including low-flying drones with a small radar cross-section. Its VHF channel picks up threats far earlier than most standard radars. However, it has a vulnerability. Its tracking accuracy is insufficient to independently generate fire control data. It requires coordination with other fire control radars within the air defense network. That gap was precisely what Ukraine intended to exploit. By 4:24, the lead drones had descended to ultra-low altitude, pressing into a pre-surveilled approach corridor. Their optical sensors had entered the final phase, identifying the bridge's shape, rail tracks, support spans, and the junction point with the main transport artery. If the Nebo-M could be suppressed or forced silent for even a few minutes, this strike would become not just a raid, but a direct attack on Russia's ability to supply the entire Eastern Front. Beyond the Nebo-M's early warning boundary, the swarm encountered the next layer of defense, the S-350 Vityaz air defense system, which Russia had covertly deployed around key logistics points. The S-350 was designed specifically to close dangerous gaps at medium and low altitudes. Its multifunctional radar handles detection, tracking, target assignment, and missile guidance. In theory, an extremely dangerous system against drones and low-flying cruise missiles. In practice, Ukrainian operators had driven the entire swarm down to approximately 75 meters. At that altitude, the radar horizon becomes the attacker's ally. Even with high tracking precision, the actual detection range against small drones flying at ground level drops sharply due to terrain, buildings, trees, and surface reflections. By 4:26, the lead aircraft had cleared most of the dangerous approach zone, and the window for the Russian system to react had begun to close rapidly. Any delay in passing data from the warning radar to the fire control radar compressed the intercept window to minutes, or even tens of seconds. This is where the ultra-low flight technique demonstrated its greatest value. The S-350's radar is powerful when tracking clean targets against an open sky background. Against small drones flying at ground level, its signal drowned in reflections from rails, station buildings, power line pylons, and the metal structures of the bridge area. As the swarm entered the close-in defense zone, the distance had shrunk to under 3 kilometers. This was an extremely unfavorable range for the Vityaz. Despite its fast reaction time, the system still required time to confirm the target, classify the trajectory, issue the command, and guide the missile. The maneuvering space had been compressed to a dangerous limit. Even the Pantsir S-1 covering the outer perimeter could no longer correct the situation. From detection to launch, the system must complete a full cycle: confirmation, data processing, acquisition, slewing, and firing. Drones flying at approximately 180 kilometers per hour covered critical distance during that time. At 4:28, the lead aircraft burst into the bridge's immediate defense zone, striking radar positions and intercept assets. As the main defensive line collapsed, the remaining drones poured through the breach directly toward the railway bridge. The rail area descended into chaos. Anti-aircraft fire reached upward, radar signals fragmented, and the surviving aircraft continued toward the primary target. The strike was aimed not merely at the bridge, it was aimed at Russia's ability to move fuel, weapons, and ammunition from Luhansk to Donetsk. And this was only the first phase. By 4:30, as smoke still rose over the stricken bridge, the next wave of drones continued closing in. A heavy fog had settled over the early morning, compressing visibility to a minimum. Russian defences shifted to heightened alert. Pantsir S-1 crews stared intently at their radar screens, but they hadn't yet realised. The dense fog had unexpectedly played into Ukraine's hands. An anomalous signal appeared on the screens. The same drone, but its track behaved erratically, sharp one moment, barely visible the next, drifting right, then left, showing an altitude of 120 meters, then suddenly jumping to 600. In reality, it was a single aircraft flying low through the fog. The high humidity and limited visibility multiplied the difficulty of detection, identification, and target acquisition. Every second of hesitation gave the drone the opportunity to push deeper into the bridge's coverage zone. The next problem emerged when a sudden downpour struck over Luhansk. Dense sheets of rain turned the observation background into a chaotic jumble. Signals from small, low-flying targets began flickering amid clutter from rails, bridge pylons, and surrounding structures. Pantsir S-1 crews needed additional time to confirm and acquire. Meanwhile, the UJ-26 demonstrated resilience in poor weather conditions, requiring no complex guidance signals on the final approach. The formation maintained its approach rhythm, cutting through the downpour. The lead aircraft sensors corrected course, using the bridge's shape, rails, and support structures. Eventually, one of the Pantsirs managed to acquire a target and open fire. Missiles left the launchers, accelerated to high speed, and surged toward the swarm. Within seconds, the fuses triggered. 8 Ukrainian drones were shot down on approach, but it wasn't enough. When the range became too short for effective missile employment, the Pantsir switched to cannon fire. 2 30mm autocannons cut down 4 more aircraft right before the final threshold. However, the remaining 6 drones broke through. They struck the bridge deck, rails, and load-bearing structures. A series of explosions hurled metal, concrete, and ballast gravel into the air. One span of the railway track was destroyed, and black smoke curled upward through the downpour. By 4:34, Russian defences had fired 8 missiles, expended a significant quantity of 30mm ammunition, and destroyed 12 drones. But 6 aircraft still hit their target, inflicting serious damage on the railway bridge. Yet Ukraine's plan didn't end there. The final 14 drones received updated data. A Russian train carrying weapons and ammunition had just passed through the area and was continuing toward the front line. If the train reached its destination, its cargo would immediately reach Russian units in the east. The mission had changed. The drones accelerated to maximum speed and turned onto a course along the railway line, disappearing into the downpour. By 4:36, 24 aircraft were continuing the pursuit. Russia had positioned dense, multi-layered defences here. The S-350 covered medium altitudes, Tor and Pantsir S-1 handled the close-in perimeter, and electronic warfare systems suppressed navigation and communications channels. In theory, enough to turn any drone raid into a costly war of attrition. But the swarm didn't approach from a single direction. It split into 5 groups, attacking from different angles, at different altitudes, and at different tempos. When numerous small targets appear simultaneously on multiple approach axes, radars, command posts, and intercept assets are forced to continuously reprioritize, shift tracking direction, and split their fire. The first group flew low along the railway, drawing in the close-range radars. The second shifted to the flank, pulling panzer fire away from the main axis. The third held back, creating pressure on the target classification process. The 2 remaining groups loitered along the terrain, waiting for the moment when the defensive network would be stretched to its limit. In under 30 seconds, a system designed for tight coordination was pushed to the edge of overload. When the S-350 radar operator detected 24 signals, the data was immediately relayed to the command center. An electronic warfare system specializing in satellite navigation signal suppression was activated. The effect was nearly instantaneous. The lead group began losing GPS, and the formation drifted away from the railway. Ukrainian operators immediately switched to autonomous mode. The drones transitioned to inertial navigation, combined with infrastructure object recognition, rails, pylons, stations, track curves, and the train's direction of travel, independently correcting their course. But a new problem emerged. The train was moving. The probability of a direct hit on a moving target dropped sharply. Ukraine changed tactics. One group accelerated, overtook the train, and struck a section of track ahead of the locomotive. If the train couldn't be hit while moving, the route had to be cut off. The drones pressed down to the rails and surged toward the blocking point. The first strike bent a rail, tearing it from its fastening. The second widened the zone of destruction, knocking out the sleepers. The track ahead of the locomotive was no longer a continuous path. The vibration travelled through the rails, and the drivers understood. The road ahead had been destroyed. Emergency braking. Steel wheels screamed against the rails, the entire heavy train lurching forward from the sudden deceleration. The train had transformed from a difficult-to-hit moving target into a heavy, nearly stationary mass sitting directly on the supply line. The first group struck the locomotive. The lead aircraft dove into the power section, where the propulsion unit, fuel lines, electrical systems, and main control panel are concentrated. The explosion tore through the thin armor panels, severed cables, and destroyed the fuel lines. Fire erupted from the front of the train. The locomotive didn't merely lose traction, it became a heavy obstacle, locking the entire train in place on the supply route. The next strike hit the third fuel car. A penetrating warhead ripped through the casing, and hot fragments ignited the fuel vapors. A column of fire burst from both sides of the car, spread across the ballast, and crept along the rails. The temperature in the burning zone was sufficient to deform metal and plunge the entire area into thick black smoke. The third group targeted the 12th car, carrying ammunition and military equipment. Smoke from the third car had blocked the view. The operator was no longer looking for a clear frame. He held course by distance, car number, and track direction. The drone cut through the edge of the smoke screen and slammed into the side of the 12th car. The fragmentation blast tore open the metal casing, scattered crates of ammunition and propellant charges, and created multiple ignition points. Scattered detonations began. One wall of the car blew apart, and fire crept toward the adjacent flat cars. But the chain reaction hadn't yet reached the rear of the train, so the final group pressed the attack, targeting the 18th car. The drone flew through the smoke nearly blind, holding course on inertial data alone. Then, between two walls of fire, the shadow of the 18th car flickered into view. Impact. A powerful explosion immediately ignited the rear section of the train, triggering a chain of detonations. Steel doors were blown outward, white-hot fragments flew through the air, and the blast wave threw cars from the rails. By 4:41, the Russian supply train had been completely destroyed. The locomotive eliminated, the third car engulfed in fire, the 12th torn open by the explosion. The 18th had triggered a chain reaction through the rear. The downpour could not extinguish fires fed from within by fuel and ammunition. The railway Russia had used to move equipment to the front had become a long strip of fire in the middle of Luhansk. But the real value of this strike extended far beyond the destroyed train and a damaged bridge. Ukraine had hit one of the most painful vulnerabilities in the Russian military: its ability to maintain a continuous supply flow in the east. The railway arteries of Luhansk and Donetsk are the circulatory system through which fuel, shells, armour, spare parts and reinforcements flow. When a bridge is damaged and a weapons train is stopped directly on the tracks, the damage doesn't stop at a few burning cars. It triggers a chain reaction throughout the entire operational rhythm of the Russian military in Donbass. First, Russia loses supply speed. A military train carries incomparably more than a truck convoy. When the railway is cut, Moscow is forced to shift to road transport, more expensive and more vulnerable. Second, the strike increases the burden on Russia's air defense system. If Ukraine can strike bridges, tracks and trains deep inside occupied territory, Russia will have to redirect more Pantsers, Tors, S-350s and electronic warfare assets there, leaving other directions exposed. Third, Ukraine is demonstrating a clear shift in operational thinking. The goal is not the destruction of individual units in the trenches, but the methodical exhaustion of the entire system that sustains those units. The political dimension of the strike is no less significant. When rear areas previously considered safe come under precise strikes, it hits troop morale, pressures the command hierarchy, and erodes the image of battlefield control that Moscow strives to maintain. For Kyiv, this is a clear signal. Ukraine is not merely defending and not merely counterattacking at the front. It is isolating every Russian formation by striking what matters most behind their lines. If ammunition arrives more slowly, fuel becomes scarcer, armour is harder to repair, and trains can no longer move safely. Russian pressure in the east will gradually weaken. That is why the strike on the railway bridge and supply train in Luhansk means far more than a morning explosion. It is part of a broader campaign to turn the Russian rear into a zone that is no longer safe. To stretch the air defense system, disrupt transport infrastructure, and strengthen Ukraine's position, including at the negotiating table. If this analysis was useful to you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next military breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, which supply route do you think Ukraine should strike next to reduce Russian pressure faster and bring peace closer? Goodbye.